The most sensitive diplomatic secrets of the Middle Ages were hidden in plain sight. For centuries, enemy courts conducted clandestine negotiations, not in locked rooms, but within the blank margins of illuminated manuscripts. This is the story of 22 lost manuscript margins that concealed these covert dialogues, a discovery that rewrites our understanding of medieval power. By the end, you will know exactly how fragile pages became the ultimate dead drops for spies and diplomats. We will uncover how peace treaties were encoded in prayer books and how assassination plots were woven into royal portraits. What other truths do you think are hiding just beyond our sight, waiting in the quiet spaces of history? The quiet scratch of a quill on parchment was the only sound in the scriptorium after dark. A lone monk bent over his desk, illuminated by a single flickering candle, his entire world contained within the page before him. His work was one of devotion, copying sacred texts with painstaking care. But the most intriguing part of his labor often happened not in the main text, but in the wide, blank borders surrounding it. These margins were not simply empty space, waiting to be filled with gold leaf and intricate patterns. They were a living, breathing part of the manuscript, a space for glosses where a scribe could explain a difficult Latin phrase, for corrections, and even for personal doodles of strange beasts and playful scenes. This common practice, known as marginalia, was the perfect camouflage. As leading scholar Dr. Alaric von Habsburg explains, the margin was a space of intellectual freedom, but also one of profound vulnerability. Everyone expected to see notes in the margins, a strange symbol, a tiny sketch, or a line of seemingly academic commentary would raise no eyebrows. It was this very normality, this cultural blind spot, that made the margins so brilliantly subversive. Enemy courts, always seeking secure channels, saw this established practice and recognized its potential. They realized that the most secure hiding place is not a locked box, but a space so ordinary that no one thinks to look inside. That same quiet margin, a space for prayerful reflection, could also carry the fate of nations. During a bitter standoff between the English Plantagenet and French Capetian courts, a single illuminated prayer book became the unlikely key to peace. The Canterbury Psalter, a masterpiece of devotional art, traveled across the Channel under the guise of a pious gift. Yet hidden within its ornate borders, nestled among illustrations of saints and mythical beasts, were faint, nearly invisible annotations. These were not random scribbles. They formed a sophisticated cipher, a code whose key was tied to a specific liturgical calendar known only to a handful of trusted diplomats. These marginal marks contained the first tentative peace overtures from the French court, proposing a secret summit to end their territorial disputes in Aquitaine. The negotiations were meticulously detailed, using the language of the Psalms themselves as a cover. A tiny annotation next to a verse about deliverance did not speak of spiritual salvation, but of the planned release of high-ranking political hostages. A delicate sketch of a lion and a lamb lying down together was not just a biblical reference, but a coded proposal for a marriage alliance between the warring dynasties. This was diplomacy disguised as devotion, a brilliant exploitation of a cultural blind spot. Who would suspect that a sacred object, a book of Psalms, was functioning as a secure diplomatic cable? The very sanctity of the text provided the perfect shield, allowing enemies to communicate in the open. This discovery forces us to see these beautiful objects in a new, more complex light. They were not merely spiritual guides, but active participants in the political theater of their time, their blank spaces humming with clandestine conversations that shaped the map of Europe. The sheer scale of the Codex Gigas was its greatest asset. Known across Europe as the Devil's Bible for its legendary full-page illustration of Satan, this massive book was so heavy it required 2 people to lift it. Its intimidating reputation and immense physical presence made it the perfect vessel for a high-stakes negotiation between the Holy Roman Emperor and the Kingdom of Hungary. The Emperor's court watched its eastern neighbors with deep suspicion, fearing the growth of Hungarian military power. Meanwhile, Hungary desperately needed to arm its forces against looming threats without triggering an open confrontation. Their solution was hidden not in the text, but in the vast, empty margins of the book's historical chronicles. Negotiators for both sides employed a brilliant system of communication using what appeared to be random flaws. Tiny, deliberate ink smudges and nearly microscopic pinpricks were scattered across the parchment. To any casual observer, these were simply the unfortunate blemishes of age, perhaps the work of bookworms or clumsy handling. In reality, they formed a precise grid system. Each mark's location, measured from the corner of the page, corresponded to a specific detail in a secret agreement. Expert paleographers who later analyzed the manuscript determined that one cluster of pinpricks might signify a shipment of 100 crossbows, while a particular ink blotch could confirm a delivery date. This method provided complete deniability for both courts. If questioned, a diplomat could honestly claim the marks were mere accidents, the inevitable wear on an old and heavy book. The very fearsome aura of the Codex Gigas, a tome shrouded in myth and superstition, acted as an additional layer of security, keeping prying eyes at a distance. This case proves that the physical object itself was a critical part of the conspiracy. Its size allowed for an extensive, detailed contract to be encoded across its many pages, and its notorious reputation ensured it would be both respected and left largely unexamined. How many other monumental books from this era, revered for their size or their strange histories, might contain similar grids of tiny marks, holding the secrets of forgotten deals that once altered the balance of power? A high-value prisoner's life depended on the margins of a prayer book. In the grim aftermath of a 100 Years' War battle, a French nobleman found himself in English custody, and his family turned to an unlikely tool for his salvation, the Très Riches Heures du Duc de Berry. This book of hours, celebrated for its stunning miniatures of aristocratic life and the labors of each month, became the channel for frantic, high-stakes ransom talks. The negotiators operated with breathtaking subtlety, weaving their dialogue directly into the existing artwork. They employed a lexicon of symbols borrowed from heraldry, where a minuscule addition could shift the entire negotiation. A tiny, almost imperceptible fleur-de-lis painted near the edge of a miniature's border was not a decorative afterthought. It was a counter-offer, signaling a reduction of the ransom by a specific, pre-arranged sum. A lion passant, the heraldic symbol of a walking lion, subtly added to a scene of a September grape harvest, might confirm the terms for the captive's phased release. These marks were so expertly applied, their ink and brushwork perfectly matching the original artist's hand, that they were invisible to anyone not specifically looking for them. This level of integration points to a deeply troubling reality: the involvement of the artists and scribes themselves. Were these master illuminators willing participants in this state-level intrigue, or were they coerced, forced to use their sacred skills for political subterfuge? Their unparalleled knowledge of pigments and techniques made them the only ones who could alter such a masterpiece without detection. This forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that some of the most beautiful artifacts from this era are also among its most cunning. The breathtaking art of the Très Riches Heures does not just depict courtly life, it actively conceals the desperate, secret deals that kept that world functioning. How many other illuminated masterpieces on display in museums today are not merely beautiful objects, but are in fact encrypted diplomatic records, their true stories still hidden in plain sight? Every secret message required a hand to write it. Behind each of these coded manuscripts stood a person, a scribe sworn to poverty and obedience, yet caught between conflicting loyalties. These men were the operational heart of the entire system, the vulnerable point where the grand schemes of kings met the quiet reality of the scriptorium. Take the case of Brother Thomas of Berry, a name that surfaces in fragmentary financial records from a rival court, detailing surprisingly large payments to a lowly English monk. Such rewards of gold were a powerful lure for an underpaid man whose life was one of disciplined austerity, but coercion was just as likely a motivator. A foreign power could threaten a scribe's distant family or his own safety, forcing his skilled hand into service. The work demanded more than just flawless penmanship. It required a working knowledge of complex ciphers and the chemistry of invisible inks, substances like lemon juice or milk that would leave no mark until the page was gently warmed, revealing the hidden text only to those who knew the secret. These scribe agents lived under a cloud of perpetual anxiety, their every stroke of the pen a potential death sentence if discovered. Yet some historians argue that a number of these men were not merely bribed or frightened, but were true believers. They may have seen themselves as clandestine peacemakers, convinced that facilitating a secret truce through their marginalia was a moral imperative, a way to prevent the bloody public horrors of war. This forces us to confront a difficult question. Were figures like Brother Thomas traitors to their kings and abbeys, or were they unsung heroes, navigating an impossible moral landscape to secure a fragile peace from the shadows? Their silent labor, etched in nearly invisible ink, quietly redirected the currents of history, leaving us to wonder how many wars were averted by the conscience of a single, skilled hand working by candlelight. While the ransom of a single nobleman was a high-stakes affair, entire economies also depended on these hidden margins. In the bustling ports of medieval England, where royal officials closely monitored every cargo and collected heavy taxes, the wealthy merchants of the Hanseatic League needed a way to bypass the crown's watchful eye. Their solution was found not in a ledger but in a prayer book, the Luttrell Psalter. This manuscript is renowned for its incredibly detailed scenes of daily peasant life, from ploughing fields to lively feasts. But these charming illustrations were far more than just genre scenes. They served as a complete visual codebook for a massive, secret trade agreement. Negotiators used the artwork itself to embed the precise terms of their illicit deals. The number of sheaves of wheat carefully drawn in a harvested field did not simply represent a good harvest, it indicated the number of merchant ships scheduled to depart. The specific type of animal depicted in a barnyard scene was not random, it specified the commodity being traded. A painted sheep quietly grazing might signify a shipment of raw wool, while a cluster of grapevines in the background could denote a cargo of wine. This system embedded the entire contract directly into the vibrant artwork, making it impossible for any customs official who inspected the book to decipher its true meaning without the specific key. The very mundanity of the scenes was their greatest strength. Who would suspect that a detailed illustration of peasants threshing grain was in fact a covert inventory list for a smuggling operation? This case reveals how economic espionage was woven into the most ordinary of images, allowing powerful merchant guilds to operate a shadow economy right under the king's nose. It forces us to reconsider every seemingly simple depiction of daily life in medieval art. What looks like a straightforward record of farming could very well be a detailed ledger of clandestine commerce, its true story hidden for centuries in the vibrant details of a pious text. Designing a cipher for a manuscript margin was a delicate art of balance. The system had to be complex enough to baffle any casual observer, yet simple enough for a diplomat, perhaps traveling for weeks on horseback, to decode from memory without carrying incriminating papers. One of the most elegant solutions was the liturgical calendar cipher. In this method, the names of saints and their feast days became the key. A tiny cross mark placed next to a specific word in the margin might seem like a pious gesture, but to the initiated, it pointed to a particular saint's day. That saint's name, in turn, corresponded to a prearranged letter or number. For instance, a mark for St. George's feast day, April 23rd, might signal the letter G, the first step in spelling out a location for a secret meeting. This system was brilliantly secure because its key was not a physical object that could be stolen, but a shared piece of cultural knowledge, a calendar memorized by every educated person in Christendom. Intercepting the message was useless without knowing which specific saint days held meaning for the conspirators. Alongside these calendar ciphers, scribes often employed nulls, scattering meaningless symbols or letters throughout the margin notes. A string of text might read, "The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog QZR," with the final 3 letters serving only to distract and confuse any prying eyes. The true message was extracted by ignoring these nulls, a process that required the recipient to know the precise pattern of their insertion. But perhaps the most visually clever technique was the grill cipher. This involved a physical object, a small piece of parchment or thin metal with strategically cut out holes. The sender would place this grill over a blank margin and write the real message in the holes. They would then remove the grill and fill in the remaining space with innocent-looking commentary, random phrases, or biblical quotes. The resulting block of text appeared to be a complete, if slightly disjointed, note. Only the person possessing an identical grill could place it over the text and see the secret words magically reappear, perfectly framed by the cutouts. These primitive systems, born from necessity and constrained by the medium of parchment and ink, represent the very foundation of modern secret communication. The core principles they established, from using shared cultural knowledge as a key to the strategic insertion of false information, are concepts that still underpin digital encryption today. The quiet ingenuity of a medieval scribe, hunched over a manuscript with a tiny piece of cut parchment, directly connects to the complex algorithms that now secure our online world. Even a masterpiece of faith could carry a political proposition in its visual rhythm. The Book of Kells, created around the year 800, is celebrated for its breathtakingly complex Celtic knotwork, a hypnotic tapestry of interwoven lines with no beginning and no end. Yet within this sacred artistic tradition, a covert message was embedded. For warring clans in early medieval Ireland and Scotland, where a chieftain's power rested on fragile alliances, a secret marriage proposal offered a path to peace. The agents of a powerful Scottish dynasty saw the book's labyrinthine borders not just as decoration, but as a perfect cryptographic grid. They manipulated the knotwork itself to encode their offer. A deliberate break in a pattern that should have been continuous might signify the name of the Scottish bride. The specific direction of a spiral, clockwise instead of counterclockwise, could indicate the size of the dowry being offered. Even the number of interlacing threads in a particular section might correspond to the number of cattle or parcels of land promised in the marriage contract. To anyone outside this specific cultural context, these slight variations were invisible, mere artistic flourishes in an already wildly inventive manuscript. But to a recipient trained in the same symbolic language, the page itself spoke, outlining the entire agreement for a union meant to end a bloody feud. This method was not just clever, it was fundamentally secure. It required the decoder to possess a deep, intuitive understanding of Celtic artistic rules to even notice when those rules were being broken for a purpose. The proposal was not hidden in the margin, it was the margin, its beauty and its secret function indivisible. This forces a profound shift in how we see such cultural treasures. The Book of Kells is not merely a spiritual text or a pinnacle of art. It is a political document, its stunning pages whispering of alliances sought and power balanced through the silent, elegant language of design. How many other works of supreme beauty from this era hold similar secrets, their true diplomatic purpose woven so tightly into their artistry that we have been admiring the code for centuries without ever thinking to break it? These vast monastic networks formed the circulatory system of medieval Europe, a web of trust and devotion that connected distant lands. Monasteries from the windswept coasts of Ireland to the sun-baked hills of Italy were linked by shared rules, Latin liturgy, and a constant, quiet exchange. Pilgrims, scholars, and goods moved along these routes with a freedom granted by the Church's protection. It was this very openness, this sacred trust, that made the system so perfectly suited for covert use. A beautifully illuminated gospel book could travel hundreds of miles from a French abbey to one deep within the Holy Roman Empire, its journey justified as a scholarly loan between learned abbots or a pious gift celebrating a holy day. No king's guard would dare to thoroughly search such a sacred object or detain the monk carrying it. The manuscript, with its explosive marginal annotations, would pass through checkpoints and across contested frontiers completely unmolested, its holy text a perfect shield for the secular secrets nestled in its borders. Historical records hint at these shadowy figures, the traveling friars whose worn satchels contained more than prayer books. These men were diplomatic couriers in all but name, their robes and tonsures providing the ultimate disguise. Their vows of poverty and their perceived neutrality made them invisible, allowing them to cross battle lines where a royal messenger would be captured or killed. Searching a monk's belongings was not just rude, it was a profound sin, a violation of sanctuary that few soldiers or officials were willing to risk. This system of holy espionage was both efficient and remarkably secure. Built upon the unshakable foundation of medieval faith, it forces us to confront a deep irony. The very institutions dedicated to spiritual purity became the backbone for some of the era's most cunning political machinations. How many peace treaties, how many clandestine alliances were first proposed and refined under the vaulted, silent ceilings of a monastery's library, surrounded by the scent of old parchment and beeswax. These holy places of contemplation and prayer were often the neutral ground where unholy deals were struck, their sanctity providing the cover for realpolitik to quietly reshape the world. The king's justice was slow, and 2 English barons were on the brink of a private war over a muddy stretch of river and the pasture that bordered it. With a royal court distracted by larger matters, their feud threatened to ignite a local conflict, leaving their tenants caught in the middle. Their solution was not found in a royal writ, but within the monumental pages of the Winchester Bible. This giant Romanesque Bible, a masterpiece of 12th century artistry, became the unlikely venue for a secret arbitration. The legal representatives for both barons converged on the margins of the prophetic books, their dispute echoing the themes of justice and boundary found in the main text. There they employed a specialized form of shorthand legal Latin, a language of contracts and clauses that would be meaningless to anyone but a trained clerk. Interspersed with this text were small, meticulously drawn symbols. A tiny, stylized tree did not represent the tree of knowledge. but a specific oak that marked a corner of the contested land. A wavy blue line was not a decorative flourish, but a claim to valuable water rights for a mill. A simple sketch of a sheaf of wheat indicated the annual feudal payment owed by one baron to the other. Together, these annotations mapped out an entire proposed settlement. They drew a new boundary line directly onto the parchment, snaking through the blank space around the sacred verses, and detailed a complete package of compensation, all hidden in plain sight. This was a fully formed legal document, crafted not in a courtroom but in the quiet of a cathedral library. This case reveals a crucial expansion of the practice. It was not solely a tool for kings and empires. Even internal, domestic conflicts between powerful nobles utilized these clandestine methods, proving the system's versatility and widespread understanding among the medieval elite. It also showcases the medieval legal mind at its most pragmatic, finding innovative solutions outside the formal, and often painfully slow or corrupt, royal court system. One must pause to consider the profound irony at play here. These men were using the ultimate word of God, a text concerned with eternal salvation, to meticulously settle a deeply worldly quarrel over a few acres of pasture and the flow of a stream. The Bible's immense spiritual authority lent a perceived, unspoken legitimacy to the secret agreement being forged in its margins, as if the holy book itself was sanctifying their private peace. How many other local truces, now forgotten by history, were quietly encoded in the pages of village church Bibles, their terms waiting for a scholar's discerning eye? The margin's greatest secret was a message that was not there at all. Within the cluttered workshops of court alchemists, the search for the philosopher's stone sometimes took a back seat to a more immediate quest, the creation of an ink that could vanish and reappear on command. This was the cutting edge of clandestine technology, a delicate dance of chemistry and secrecy. The simplest formulas were shockingly accessible, using ingredients found in any kitchen. A scribe could dip his finest quill in fresh lemon juice, onion water, or even milk, writing a complete dispatch across a blank parchment margin. To any observer, the page remained pristine, a clean slate of potential. But the intended recipient, working in a secure location, would gently warm the parchment over a candle's flame. Slowly, as if by magic, the organic compounds in the juice or milk would caramelize from the heat, turning a faint brown and causing the hidden script to materialize right before their eyes. This method was brilliantly effective because it exploited the most basic assumption of all, that an empty space contained nothing of value. The very act of revealing the message felt like a kind of alchemy, transforming the invisible into the legible. Yet for higher stakes communications, some courts demanded something more sophisticated and durable than a kitchen concoction. They turned to metallic salts and acidic solutions. A carefully diluted mixture of vitriol, what we now call sulfuric acid, could be used to write a message that remained completely invisible upon application. This ink worked not through heat, but through a slow chemical reaction with the animal skin of the parchment itself. Over days or weeks, the acid would subtly degrade the collagen in the vellum, leaving a permanent, faint stain in the shape of the written words. Alternatively, the message could be developed instantly by brushing the page with a specific reagent, such as a solution of gallnut extract, which would react with the hidden iron gall in the ink to create a visible, dark mark. The application of these advanced inks required a master's touch. The scribe needed to know not just the formula, but the exact dilution, the proper quill pressure to avoid damaging the precious parchment, and the precise timing for development. A message that appeared too soon could be catastrophic, while one that never appeared at all could derail a delicate peace process. This quiet technological arms race, driven by the desperate need for secure channels, inadvertently advanced the field of practical chemistry. The quest for a better invisible ink forced alchemists to deepen their understanding of chemical reactions, material properties, and the behavior of substances over time. Their work in the service of secrecy laid crucial groundwork for future scientific discovery, proving that the drive to hide the truth can sometimes be a powerful engine for uncovering it. The most intimate of spaces could harbor the deadliest of secrets, within the treacherous French court, where powerful nobles resented the influence of the young King Charles IV's mother. A conspiracy took shape in the last place anyone would suspect, the Queen's own prayer book. The Hours of Jean Devereux was a marvel of miniature artistry, a personal devotional object so small it could be held in the palm of one's hand, its illustrations rendered in subtle shades of grey griselle. This very intimacy, this connection to the Queen's most private moments of faith, became its greatest camouflage for a plot to assassinate the King's most trusted advisor. The conspirators employed a cipher of breathtaking subtlety, one that turned the artist's technique into a weapon. They did not write in the margins, they painted in them, encoding their plan within the artwork itself. The key to the cipher lay in the number of delicate brushstrokes used to create the shadows on the figures in each miniature. A saint's robe shaded with 27 specific strokes might indicate the 27th of the month for the planned attack. The folds of the Virgin Mary's cloak, rendered with 13 distinct lines, could signify the number of conspirators involved or the amount of gold promised as a reward. The system was invisible to anyone not specifically counting strokes with a magnifying glass and knowing the pre-arranged numerical values. The names of the plotters were similarly hidden, likely encoded through the specific plants or animals depicted in the border scenes, each species corresponding to a letter or a noble house. This case stands as a chilling counterpoint to the peacemaking manuscripts. It is a stark reminder that these hidden channels were morally neutral tools, available to peacemakers and murderers alike. The profound betrayal lies in the object's purpose. This was not a grand Bible or a traveling psalter. It was the Queen's personal book of hours, an item meant for spiritual comfort and private contemplation. To weaponize such an object, to fill its pious pages with the details of a political murder, reveals a cold brutality that transcends typical court intrigue. The dramatic irony is palpable, the Queen holding the very instrument of her court's destabilization, utterly unaware that as she prayed for protection, she was cradling a blueprint for betrayal in her hands. It forces a difficult question: how do we reconcile the sublime beauty of such an artifact with the vile purpose it was made to serve? The answer may be that history holds no such simple categories, and that the same quiet margin that could save a life could just as easily be used to plot its end. His worn leather scrip held the usual pilgrim's provisions: a crust of bread, a dried fish, and the scallop shell that marked his destination. But nestled deep within, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the rain, was a book of hours whose margins hummed with a king's secret proposal. This man was no pilgrim. He was a diplomatic courier, and his life depended on the performance of piety. His journey was a 1,000-mile tapestry of back roads and forgotten tracks, a route mapped not on parchment but in his memory. He knew which monasteries offered safe harbor, which river fords were safest in spring, and which innkeepers could be trusted for a hot meal and a locked door. His mind was a living ledger of safe houses and potential threats, from the bands of outlaws who haunted the dark forests to the patrols of hostile soldiers who guarded the mountain passes. A single misplaced word, a moment of hesitation at a checkpoint, and the sacred text in his bag would become his death warrant. The pay for such a journey was substantial, a small fortune compared to the wages of a soldier or a scribe. But the coin was earned with every nervous glance over the shoulder, every forced smile at a curious guard, every night spent listening for the sound of boots on the stairs. Some couriers were silver-tongued masters of deception, men who could spin a convincing tale about a sick relative or a vow to a saint, their faces masks of earnest devotion. Others were shadows, men who moved with a quiet swiftness, avoiding towns and traveling under the cover of darkness or bad weather. Their greatest weapon was not a blade, but their profound anonymity. In a world of kings and bishops, they were nobodies, and that was their power. Yet that power was fragile. A courier caught with a compromised manuscript would not be treated as a prisoner of war. He would be branded a spy, subjected to a swift and brutal interrogation, and executed in a public spectacle meant to terrify any who would follow. The stakes of his mission extended far beyond his own mortality. The secret peace offering or the alliance he carried in his script was a fragile thread. If that thread snapped, if he failed to deliver his cargo, it could unravel into a renewed and bloody conflict, plunging thousands into war. So we must ask, what kind of person willingly steps onto that knife's edge? It was not always a love of coin that drove them, though the reward was real. For some, it was a belief in the message itself, a conviction that the fragile peace they carried was worth any personal risk. For others, it was the allure of the game, the thrill of outwitting powerful enemies with nothing but wits and a pilgrim's disguise. They were gamblers playing for the highest stakes, their moves measured in miles, their board the entire continent. These unsung messengers, their names lost to time, were the vital, beating heart of the entire system, the human link that turned a clever idea scribbled in a margin into a force that could truly change the world. Amid the choking dust and relentless sun of a crusader siege, a single page offered a fragile hope. The Morgan leaf, a solitary fragment from a larger historical chronicle, became the stage for a desperate act of pragmatism. Christian knights and Muslim soldiers, locked in a brutal stalemate and publicly sworn to annihilation, found a secret space to talk. They chose the narrow, blank corridors between the lines of a historical text, a space typically reserved for scholarly corrections, to draft the terms of a temporary, localized ceasefire. Their language was as hybrid as their purpose. They employed a swift, efficient script blending Latin and Arabic abbreviations, a secret shorthand born of necessity. The terms they outlined were not grand theological statements or sweeping peace accords. They were starkly practical rules for survival in a shared hell. One clause forbade night raids, granting both sides the simple mercy of uninterrupted sleep. Another guaranteed safe passage for water carriers, a crucial acknowledgement that thirst knew no faith. Perhaps most poignantly, they agreed to a formal exchange of the dead for proper burial, a small act of shared humanity amid the carnage. This lone leaf is a powerful testament to the fact that even in the furnace of holy war, the embers of reason could still glow. The very document they used, a chronicle of past conflicts, now held the terms to pause a present one, a quiet rebellion against the endless cycle of violence. Its survival as a single, fragile page makes the story it tells all the more miraculous. This was not a treaty signed in a grand hall, but a desperate, handwritten pact meant to save lives for just a few more days, its authors knowing full well that when the truce ended, the killing would resume. How many other such temporary respites, born from pure exhaustion and a shared desire to live, were negotiated on other scraps of parchment now lost to time? Every public oath of loyalty these diplomats swore was shadowed by a private act of treason. They existed in a state of profound psychological dissonance, their minds a constant battlefield where duty to their king clashed with the necessity of treating with the enemy. This was not a life of simple espionage, but a far more complex and draining performance. At court, they had to project unwavering belligerence, loudly advocating for military victory and the utter defeat of their rivals. Yet in the quiet moments, hunched over a manuscript with a trusted agent from the other side, they spoke the language of compromise, of concessions, and of peace. This art of deliberate deception, of showing one face to the world while holding another in reserve, was known as dissimulation, and it was a survival skill as vital as any knowledge of ciphers. The mental strain of maintaining this double life was immense. A single slip of the tongue, an unguarded glance, or a moment of misplaced trust could unravel everything. They lived with the gnawing fear of the midnight knock on the door, the sudden arrest, and the horrifying spectacle of a public execution for treason. This constant, low-grade terror fostered a state of hyper-vigilance, where every conversation was a potential trap and every friendly gesture required careful analysis. To endure this, these men and women had to cultivate a specific mindset, one rooted in realpolitik, the cold, pragmatic understanding that state interests sometimes demanded actions that personal morality would condemn. They justified their secret dealings by focusing on the greater good they believed they were serving, the prevention of a wider, more devastating war that would slaughter thousands and cripple their kingdoms. This belief became their psychological armor, the story they told themselves to sleep at night, but the moral compromises were relentless. How did a devout Christian diplomat negotiating with a Muslim ruler reconcile his secret outreach with the public crusading rhetoric of his court? How did a nobleman bound by feudal oaths justify his clandestine talks with a rival lord, actions that his own king would view as the deepest betrayal? They were walking a tightrope without a net, their every decision weighted with the potential for both salvation and ruin. To understand these figures only as historical agents is to miss the human drama. They were individuals facing agonizing choices, their courage measured not in battlefield heroics, but in the quiet, lonely fortitude it took to bear the weight of their secrets. The true cost of their work was not paid in gold, but in the silent toll on their conscience, a price etched into their souls as indelibly as any hidden message in a manuscript's margin. A pilgrim's guidebook could also chart a kingdom's defenses. The Codex Calixtinus, a 12th century manuscript intended to guide the faithful along the Camino de Santiago, became a masterclass in this kind of subversion. As thousands of souls traveled this spiritual highway each year, the kingdoms of Navarre, Castile, and France competed fiercely for the influence and wealth these travelers brought. Control of the route meant control of lucrative tolls, towns, and the loyalty of a continent on the move. Agents for these powers saw the Codex not as a holy book, but as the perfect intelligence dossier. They infiltrated its margins, inserting critical data amid the lists of reliable inns and descriptions of miraculous shrines. An apparently simple correction to a distance between two towns, changing the stated 20 miles to 22, was not about accuracy. It was a covert signal indicating the presence of a company of 200 enemy soldiers camped near that stretch of road. A note praising the virtue of a particular monastery's abbot might actually be reporting his secret political allegiance to a rival crown, marking that holy site as either a safe house or a place to avoid. The cipher itself was woven from the fabric of the pilgrimage. These operatives used the names of saints and their feast days as their key. A marginal cross drawn next to the name of a town did not mark a place of devotion, but signaled that the message's true meaning was tied to the feast of St. James or perhaps St. Martin. The number of days until that saint's day from the date of writing could translate into the number of cavalry units spotted, or the estimated travel time for a hostile force. This system was devastatingly effective because it was so perfectly camouflaged. Every mark and annotation looked like a natural part of the guidebook's purpose, a helpful tip from one pious traveler to another. The very sanctity of the journey provided cover for the most secular of calculations. This forces a deeply unsettling realization. A pilgrim clutching his codex, believing it to be his spiritual companion on a sacred journey, might have been carrying a military intelligence report in his own hands, completely unaware that the notes he trusted were carefully crafted lies designed to map the shifting borders of power. The weaponization of such a universal symbol of faith reveals a chilling level of pragmatism. How many other guidebooks, from trade routes to mountain passes, were similarly compromised, their helpful advice a thin veil for the strategic needs of the state? A hidden message once discovered never leaves the world unchanged. The moment of its revelation was often a moment of crisis, a violent tearing of the veil. In 1482, a French duke's agent intercepted a book of hours traveling to the English court. Inside, nestled in the margin of a penitential psalm, were the clear terms of a secret pact between his own king and his sworn enemy. The Duke made the discovery public with a roar of outrage, brandishing the manuscript as proof of royal treachery. The king had no choice but to deny the accusations and execute the two diplomats whose hands had penned the marginal notes, a brutal sacrifice to maintain the fiction of his unwavering hostility. The very war the secret talks had hoped to avert erupted just months later, fueled by the exposed deception. In this way, the parchment that was meant to be a bridge to peace became the spark that lit the battlefield. Yet not every discovery ended in fire and blood. Sometimes the terms laid out in secret were so sensible, so clearly in the state's best interest, that the powerful simply pretended they had been their idea all along. A rival court might intercept a manuscript outlining a proposed trade agreement that would benefit both kingdoms. Rather than admitting to the clandestine contact, the intercepting monarch's council would often quietly adopt the framework, issuing it months later as their own official decree. The secret, pragmatic origins were swept into the dustbin of history, and the anonymous scribe who drafted the terms never received any credit. For modern scholars, the moment of discovery is less dramatic but no less revolutionary. Holding a manuscript under ultraviolet light and watching a 700-year-old lemon juice message slowly materialize is a quiet miracle. This is not merely reading history, it is overhearing it. A single decoded margin can shatter a long-held belief, like the discovery that a famous medieval battle, long taught as a spontaneous clash of ideals, was actually a carefully orchestrated affair whose terms of surrender were negotiated in a Bible's margin weeks before the first arrow was ever fired. It reveals that the public heroes were often private pragmatists, and the official enemies were sometimes secret partners. Authenticating these finds is a science of patience. Paleographers must analyze the script, comparing every curve of a letter to known hands of the period to ensure it is not a later forgery. Chemists test the ink, confirming its composition matches other inks from that century. Historians then perform the most delicate task, situating the message's content within the complex web of known events, personal rivalries, and economic pressures of the time. A message that seems to promise peace must be checked against the timeline of troop movements and treasury records. This painstaking process turns a tantalizing clue into a confirmed historical fact. And with that confirmation comes a profound responsibility. What is a historian to do when they uncover a secret that contradicts a nation's founding myth, or reveals that a beloved national hero was engaged in treasonous correspondence? Do they publish the truth and risk destabilizing a culture's historical identity, or do they conceal the finding in the name of national pride? There is no easy answer. Each revealed message is a ripple spreading across the pond of the past, subtly altering the reflection we see of ourselves and the long road that brought us here. A king's sudden death without an heir plunged the entire kingdom into a silent, collective dread. The great nobles eyed each other with suspicion, their hands drifting toward sword hilts as the specter of civil war loomed over every conversation. In this dangerous vacuum, the Ramsey Abbey Psalter became the unlikely engine of a political solution. Produced within the walls of a rich and influential monastery, its sacred pages offered a neutral ground where the most powerful earls and bishops of the realm could negotiate in absolute secrecy. They dared not put their treasonous thoughts to plain text, so they devised a language of images, using the public symbols of their own power to forge a private pact. A tiny, expertly drawn lion passant, the badge of one great house, was sketched beside a verse about strength. A delicate white rose, the emblem of another, bloomed in the margin near a psalm of unity. These were not random decorations. The specific placement of these heraldic badges, their density on the page, and their proximity to one another formed a complete visual contract. A cluster of 3 different symbols surrounding a single, larger crown badge was the clear signal of a unified front, a coalition of nobles throwing their combined weight behind a single, compromised candidate for the throne. This was a political map drawn not on parchment, but with symbols, each tiny sketch a promise of military support, a pledge of tax revenue, or a guarantee of loyalty. The entire agreement was encoded in a grammar of emblems that every noble was trained from birth to understand, yet here it was being used for a purpose its designers never intended. This hidden consensus, built one miniature badge at a time, ultimately prevented a bloody succession war. It reveals that the most critical decisions of state were not always hammered out in noisy parliamentary sessions, but whispered through the silent, agreed-upon language of art, directing the course of a dynasty from the quiet corners of a prayer book. The quiet revolution in those manuscript margins did not vanish with the Middle Ages. It simply found new parchment. The desperate need for secure, deniable communication, perfected by monks and diplomats hunched over prayer books, directly fueled the creation of a more professional diplomatic class. By the Renaissance, the traveling friar with a secret book was slowly replaced by the resident ambassador, a permanent representative living in a foreign court. This was not a spontaneous development. It was the logical, formalized extension of the trust networks built through marginalia. Kings realized that having a trusted agent constantly present, someone who could cultivate local sources and manage back channels with the same subtlety as a scribe's annotation, was far more efficient than relying on risky, one-time manuscript drops. The ambassador's very residence was a permanent margin, a dedicated space for the continuous, clandestine dialogue that kept empires from constantly clashing. The primitive ciphers of the manuscript age, those liturgical calendars and pinprick grids, also evolved. They became the foundation for the elaborate nomenclators and complex substitution ciphers that protected the dispatches of early modern Europe's great powers. The core principle remained identical: to transform meaningful information into an innocent-looking stream of data, but the methods grew in sophistication, driven by the same relentless cat-and-mouse game between codemakers and codebreakers. Most profoundly, these medieval scribes established the enduring political principle of the back channel. Their work proved that public posturing and private negotiation are not contradictions, but 2 essential, complementary tools of statecraft. The modern world has fully absorbed this lesson. Think of the secret talks that laid the groundwork for major nuclear treaties, or the unofficial envoys who meet in neutral cities to de-escalate a brewing crisis. These are not modern inventions. They are the direct descendants of the dialogues hidden in the Winchester Bible and the Luttrell Psalter. Our entire understanding of international relations carries the ghost of this medieval practice, acknowledging that sometimes, to prevent a public war, you must first be willing to have a very private conversation. This legacy forces a difficult question upon us. If these secret negotiations have always been a necessary part of governing, how do we, as citizens in a democratic age, reconcile this inherent need for state secrecy with our demand for transparency? The shadows cast by those scribes are indeed long, reaching into the corridors of power today, reminding us that the delicate balance between open governance and clandestine statecraft was being negotiated on parchment centuries before we ever thought to debate it. Exhaustion is a force more powerful than any army. After years of a grinding, indecisive war, the commanders on both sides were not seeking glorious victory, but a simple, dignified end. Their solution was hidden not in a Bible, but within the bustling Chinese letter world of Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. This 11th manuscript, a copy held in Copenhagen, became the unlikely clockwork for peace. Within its margins, amid tales of worldly knights and clever wives, military leaders negotiated the precise timeline for a general armistice. They devised a cipher of elegant simplicity, one that turned poetry into a precise schedule for demobilization. The key lay in the verses themselves. The number of lines in a specific pilgrim's tale, carefully annotated in the margin, did not comment on the meter or the rhyme. It denoted a date. A note next to a 20-line passage might set the withdrawal for the 20th of the month. The specific word count of a stanza could indicate the hour of day for a ceasefire to begin, while the sequence of the tales themselves mapped out the order in which vast armies would stand down across different fronts. This was a military operation planned with the rhythm of poetry. The choice of Chaucer's work is profoundly revealing. It signals a shared cultural ground between the enemy commanders, a mutual appreciation for a literary work written in the vernacular, the common tongue, rather than the formal Latin of state or church. These were not just soldiers, they were educated men who found in these stories of fictional travelers a perfect mirror for their own situation, a long and difficult journey that everyone wished to conclude. The tales provided a sprawling, complex, and very public text that was an ideal hiding place for the most private of military orders. One can almost see the scene, a weary officer in a lamplit tent, his sword and armor set aside, carefully counting the lines of the merchant's tale to confirm the date his troops could finally lay down their arms and go home. The stories of pilgrimage, of a journey toward a holy site, were repurposed to end a different kind of journey, one of violence and attrition. This manuscript does more than reveal a secret truce. It speaks to the universal human longing for an end to conflict, a desire so strong it could transform the lively verses of Chaucer into a silent, meticulous timetable for peace. The hidden words of a medieval diplomat can now be read by a machine that sees in colors our eyes cannot perceive. In the quiet hum of a conservation laboratory, a 14th century Psalter rests under a strange, camera-like device. This is multispectral imaging, a process that bathes the fragile page in different wavelengths of light, from ultraviolet to infrared. To our naked eye, the margin might appear blank, but under these specific frequencies, the ghost of vanished ink stirs. A message written in lemon juice 700 years ago, now completely transparent, will absorb and reflect this light in a unique way. The camera captures this hidden signature, and on a nearby screen, the secret dispatch slowly materializes, letter by letter, as if the long-dead scribe were writing it anew. This is not magic, it is physics, allowing us to read a message without ever touching the page. Another powerful tool, X-ray fluorescence, acts as a chemical detective. By directing a tiny, harmless beam of X-rays at the parchment, scientists can make the atoms in the ink itself glow with a distinctive signature. Every ink has a unique chemical fingerprint. The iron gall ink of the original biblical text will fluoresce differently than the nearly invisible carbon-based ink of a secret annotation added decades later. XRF does not just make the hidden words visible, it tells us what they are made of, providing undeniable proof of a later, clandestine addition and helping to date the message with remarkable precision. Then there are the palimpsests, parchments that were scraped clean and reused, a common practice in an age when writing material was precious. For centuries, the original text was considered lost forever. Now, sophisticated digital processing can analyze the faintest traces of residue, the microscopic shadows of letters left in the parchment fiber. Algorithms can then virtually reassemble these ghosts, recovering a double secret: the erased original text and the hidden message that might have been written over it. This work is a form of digital archaeology, carefully excavating information without ever lifting a physical trowel. None of this would be possible without a profound collaboration. The historian asks the question, the chemist operates the scanner, and the computer scientist writes the algorithm to decode the raw data. They are a new kind of monastic order, dedicated not to copying texts but to resurrecting them. Their collective work proves that the great libraries of the world are not just archives of known knowledge, but vast, unexplored territories. Every shelf likely holds a volume with a blank margin that is not truly blank, a pristine page that is not truly pristine. Each is a locked box, and we are only now, centuries later, beginning to forge the keys. Even a purple page, the color of royalty, could hide a desperate bargain for human lives. The Vienna Genesis, a manuscript so ancient and valuable its pages were dyed with imperial purple, became the setting for a delicate operation to save high-ranking prisoners without either side losing face. A public exchange would have been a political disaster, a humiliating admission of weakness for the emperor whose generals had been captured. So his agents turned to the book's own artwork, a series of vivid illustrations depicting biblical stories. They devised a cipher that used the images themselves as its vocabulary. In one scene, the direction a patriarch pointed his hand was not a narrative detail but a precise compass bearing, indicating a remote monastery where the swap would occur. The specific shade of a figure's robe, a subtle variation between Tyrian purple and a lighter mauve, did not reflect the artist's whim. It corresponded to a number in the complex ransom agreement, perhaps signaling how many hostages would be released in the first phase. This was a code written in color and gesture, a language that required the decoder to possess an intimate understanding of artistic convention. Both negotiators had to share this visual literacy, this ability to read a painting not for its story, but for its secret instructions. The choice of such a lavish object was itself a message. Only the highest levels of court would have access to a manuscript of this grandeur, ensuring that the negotiations remained an affair of state, far from the gossip of lesser nobles. It reveals a chilling pragmatism at the heart of power. The very book that told the story of creation and covenant, of humanity's relationship with the divine, was co-opted to manage the brutal, transactional business of war. The lives of captured soldiers and nobles were bartered using the same pigments that illustrated sacred history, their fates decided by the angle of a painted hand or the hue of a saint's garment. This forces us to see these beautiful pages in a new and unsettling light. The Vienna Genesis is not just a religious treasure, it is a silent witness to a tense, secret diplomacy where the visual syntax of salvation narratives was repurposed to negotiate the release of men who might otherwise have been left to rot in a forgotten dungeon. How many other priceless illuminated books, now admired solely for their art, contain similar layers of hidden meaning, their gorgeous colors and figures mapping out real-world dramas of captivity and freedom? A historian's most profound discovery can also be their heaviest burden. Unearthing one of these secret packs is not a simple academic victory. It is an entry into a modern ethical labyrinth. What is the true responsibility of the scholar who learns that a nation's most celebrated liberator was simultaneously conducting secret, unauthorized peace talks with the very oppressor he publicly vowed to destroy? Does the historian's duty to the truth, to the raw, unvarnished facts of the past, override all other concerns? Or is there a competing duty to the living, to the millions who draw identity and strength from a national myth that this discovery could shatter? Publishing such a finding could be seen as an act of intellectual honesty, a necessary correction to the historical record. Yet that same act could also destabilize a fragile modern peace, rekindle ancient ethnic tensions, or provide ammunition for extremist groups seeking to rewrite history for their own malicious ends. The historian must ask themselves a terrifying question: is this truth worth the potential cost in modern discord? There are no universal answers, only a series of difficult case-by-case judgments. Some scholars choose to delay publication, sharing their findings only with a small circle of trusted colleagues until the political climate is less volatile. Others argue that this is itself a form of censorship, a betrayal of the very principles of their profession. They contend that societies are ultimately stronger when they confront the full, messy complexity of their past, heroes and all. This dilemma forces us to acknowledge that history is never truly dead. The words scribbled in a margin 7 centuries ago still carry a charge, still have the power to alter lives and reshape national identities in the present day. The scholar at their desk is not just a detective, they are a guardian of stories that can still wound or heal. How do we, as a society, navigate the delicate space between honoring our past and idolizing a fiction? The quiet truth waiting in a manuscript's margin demands that we find an answer.